So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for joining. This is just like a moment for me to kind of touch base with you because, you know, I miss all of you. I haven't seen you in a while. And this is a time for me to kind of get a chance to answer any questions you might have, and also to talk about my journey of this book that I'm making. So this first session is only about 30 minutes. All three sessions are actually 30 minutes, but it's a time for, this first one's going to be talking about Ask Me Anything, and then I will talk about the book writing process, and how I got involved with this whole rigmarole. So first of all, just wanted to say, because I only have 30 minutes here, not going to necessarily have like interviews, like have all of you kind of mention and talk about yourself, because I just want to get to the meat here. So I'm actually just going to start off with talking about, like, number one, why did I write the book in the first place? And then I will kick it off and see if any of you lovely people want to ask me any questions about anything, really. Janine's coming in too. So number one, I wrote the book. So if you guys didn't know, last year, 2019, I decided to do a self-imposed sabbatical. And because I was like in this place of burnout, and so many people had said, they're like, Amy, I think you should write a book because you have a lot to say about the work that you did. And prior to that, I was working as a presidential innovation fellow within between two administrations, working on this thing called the Better Government Movement, focusing on how do you change 21st century government, right? And so I had some interesting, you'll hear this story in the book, but had some interesting values conversations with the Trump administration as we went forward. And I decided to kind of go out on the outside and to kind of refresh myself. And this is an exploration. The reason why I talk about empathy is because I literally had to take a test to tell me that my biggest strength was empathy. And so I lead with empathy, and I was just like, oh, I was like, okay, well, I found this out like probably in 2012 that my biggest strength is that. And so when I started thinking about and exploring this concept, I started thinking about the intersection of empathy and change, and how really in change, and I've done change management before, and innovation, in those places, we need to have more empathy. And also me being an expert, I guess, since it's my strength, why don't I try to go explore this in the book? So here I am. That's why I wrote the book, and I'm so excited that all of you have pre-ordered the book and are on the journey with me. So I'm going to start off here. Lots of cool people on the line here. I'm so excited to see you all. But wanted to see if you guys have any questions. Like, this is going to be kind of like hot seat style. I don't know if you ever played hot seat with me. I love it. You can ask me. We have like 3 different levels, like a mild, medium, and caliente. You can ask me any questions. Caliente is like the how spicy these questions are. Feel free to ask me caliente questions. Hopefully it's around the book and not about other things, but I'm open to those questions too. So I'll do about 10 minutes or so of questions, maybe 15 minutes or so. So go ahead and put them out there.
Do we do it by voice or type it?
Both. You can do both.
Okay, so I have a question, and this is probably caliente.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
And the question is, so Trump administration, what steps do you think the people that you interacted with have to take to be more empathetic? I'm assuming that there was a lack of empathy in the interactions you had.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Ty, you know the story intimately. And I think a lot of you might as well. You know, what's interesting is that I have a whole chapter on like where we are now, and what people have found is that people who have more power and more and also or more wealthy tend to not be empathetic, right? And so that kind of pushes you in a direction of not being as empathetic. And so what the book, like what the people have said in the research, has said that that people will have to want to have a choice to be more empathetic. And so there's also 3 different kinds of empathy. There is number 1, there's cognitive empathy, which I call the head trying to like kind of take somebody else's perspective. And that's like the first step in empathy. And a lot of times the people who I was working with, especially in the Trump administration, weren't even willing to make that leap to even take my perspective, right? I went into a meeting and they literally said, you're thinking about everything wrong. You need to think about how do you fit into what we are doing, right? Which like, I also had 5,000 people in a movement that we had built over the course of 2 years that was focused on that. So there's some really interesting stuff with that. And then the second thing, there is this, I talk about it in the book of, there is old power and new power, and there's this interesting like clash that's happening between these two worlds. This book came out in 2018, but it's talking about how technology is shoving us in a direction where we're having more open, participatory, peer-driven networks, so that kind of environment, we're naturally going in that direction. But I hope to kind of like inspire people, and that's what the book's about, is like to inspire people to actually act and be the change, to kind of push us in that direction. So it's really hard unless somebody wants to change, to actually make the change happen, especially in the Trump administration. So yeah, all right. Got some questions here. All right. Salima said, since empathy has become a big buzzword, how are you redefining it? Also, what do you think is the future of empathy? Similar to how Lean Startup evolved from Steve Blank's customer development method, what is coming next? First answer to that question, since empathy has become a big buzzword, how am I redefining it? So I actually have a definition here that is focused on, let's see, my mom's in the background. Hey, say hi to my mom.
Hi. I couldn't listen in, so I'm sneaking in.
Hey.
Sorry. Keep working.
She's here. It's okay. My mom's in the background. You can say hi. I'm spending time with her. We're taking care of each other in the pandemic. So she's sitting in, putting her shoes on.
I don't want to interrupt.
Here we go, Mom. So I'm talking about, I'm answering a question, Mom. Since empathy has become a big buzzword, how are you redefining it? So I do have a definition of, which I cannot think of off the top of my head, but what actually, the exact wording of it, I think it's in the chapters that I sent out to you all. One of the definition essentially is going into this idea of, I talked about cognitive empathy. There's a second piece of empathy called emotional or affective empathy, which is trying to take feeling somebody else's emotions. And number 3 is what we call compassionate empathy, and that is actually doing something with their needs and helping meet their needs. So I actually talk about it in 3 ways. It's the head, the heart, and the hand. And so when I think about empathy, I think if we can really simplify it to that, we're like, am I mentally connecting with you? Am I there in person with you? Am I emotionally connecting with you and trying to be there in the moment? And number 3, I think, which is the most important part that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about in empathy, is, are you helping meet my needs? And it's not just, a one-way dialogue, it's a 2-way dialogue. And so I define it that way. So then also, Salima, the second question you had is also, what do you think is the future of empathy, similar to Lean Startup evolved from customer development method? So I'm actually finishing up this chapter right now called The Evolution of Design. I am really excited about this chapter in particular because I talked yesterday morning with the director of and the creator of this place called the Creative Reaction Lab out of St. Louis, Missouri, where they're trying to tackle systemic racism. I've been a fan of them for a while, but yesterday I got to talk a little bit more with the CEO of it. And they're trying to do is take they have this assumption that design creates systems of oppression, and so they think that when they're trying to deal with systemic racism, they can actually take Black and Latinx populations, instead of having this designer population or user mentality that's between the two of them, this dichotomy where it's like there's a weird power dynamic there. Let's try to actually bring people together, the people who actually are in the community together, to co-create solutions between each other. And that is this, and I'm making the case that like we have to eliminate that dichotomy of designer to user. Why don't we try to bring the users and work with communities to make sure, who already have the trust in these communities actually, to co-create the solutions together. And that's also something I did with the Better Government movement, is I really co-created it from the beginning, and that's how we built so quickly, because we started thinking about like, what do we all believe in? What are the trends? What is the research saying? And then we kind of built it, co-created it together. So that's part of it. And then there's also this idea of like, if you heard of, like there's 3 Venn diagrams that a lot of people talk about when they talk about innovation. They talk about, is it desirable, is it feasible, and usually is it viable? So I'm making the case that the desirable piece, number 1, is like, does people want this thing? Is it feasible? Can we actually do it, right, with the resources that we have? But number 3, usually viable, is it technically feasible? Like, I mean, viable in the sense like, can we build this? Do we have the money to do this? But I'm actually removing the idea of viable, and I'm asking the question, is this necessary, right? In this world that we're in today, we don't necessarily just need a new thing to be created. We need something that is really focused and needed in the world, and not just something that is just another thing we're going to add, right? Which is the Silicon Valley way, right? Like, let's create an app around that. So those are some of the things that 4 different topics I'm talking about in that chapter. So, all right, Matt Volk. Mom, do you have anything? You want to?
No, I'm just listening.
You want to say hi to all my people? This is my mom. She's chilling. She's joining in. All right, so Matt, I'll get to you in a second, Sybil. Matt Volk, I think I've got it for you. Empathy is responding to the thoughts and emotions of others with the purpose of meeting each other's needs. Thank you, Matt. You are awesome. Yes, I love it. And Matt Volk, he and I were at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub together, so we were fellows. So I'm glad you were here. So you get to see Matt and this magnum. Okay, Sybil, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself? Oh no, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you
Yeah,
hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing this. This is really cool. I'm very excited about your book. I think it's a wonderful idea. I told you to write a book. Remember, I told you you need to write a book.
Yeah.
And you're finally writing a book.
A long time ago.
You're the second person I told to write a book, and who did it. So I'm 2 for 2.
Okay.
But anyway, for my question, one of the things, and I think your book is particularly timely, obviously, with everything that's happening with the pandemic. I know a lot of the framing is around empathy for change makers, particularly in the innovation space. Yeah. But I'm looking at it across the board, and it's what I find is really fascinating to me is with this pandemic situation, I think we're seeing at all levels, all different kinds of systems, that there is a serious deficit in empathy. And even to our social media, I mean, there's always been a lack of empathy in the social media space since the iteration. It was almost like it was built in. in a way.
Yeah.
But we're even seeing now how lack of empathy is being weaponized to deter people from practicing social distancing, wearing masks, all these kinds of things. And it's coming from the very top in the government to, your smallest governments or, people, constituents.
Mhm.
And so I would love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I know it's like a seriously broad issue and you can't obviously answer, tackle everything, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what are some of the, even if you could just mention like one thing, like what is something that you've been thinking about that we can do to try to bridge that gap? Because it's very clear now with everything that's happening that if we're to move forward as a nation, we have to look at where we have severe empathy deficits throughout our nation.
Okay, sorry. Two people are coming through the meeting here. So, thank you for that message, Sybil. And Sybil and I tried to create a company together years ago. It's still around, but Sybil is a dear friend of mine, and in a powerhouse in the DC tech community. And so, a great question. I have a chapter that I think the first time when I first did the chapter, I wrote "Empathy for Enemies" is what the name of the chapter was. Doesn't necessarily fit with my MO that I'm trying to do with like having empathy for people, because I think, first of all, like not seeing people as enemies, right? It's really seeing as somebody who is very much alike with each other. And in that chapter, I talk about that I've been talking to 3 different organizations, CEOs from 3 different organizations, that is trying to bridge this gap between like the different Trump supporters versus like Democrats, Republicans. And what's interesting is that the research has shown that we're sorting ourselves out with our ideological differences as a country, right? There's this book called The Big Sort that came out about a decade ago that talks about we are putting ourselves like rural, in cities, and separating ourselves into these different groups. And also we are doing things more alone. That's out in the world. So we'll talk about that. But there's 3 different groups. There's one group that I find is fascinating called Make America Dinner Again. That was created after the 2016 election. Woman I met when I was in San Francisco, she and another friend was like, I don't know another Trump supporter, right? But like somehow this person is president. And so she just said, let's start having dinners where we bring people from both sides of the aisle together. And actually put, I have a activity that they use in those dinners that I'm including in that chapter so that you can use that in conversation with people. A second group that I love is called Civic Dinners. Another idea of like having dinner with each other. It's really about, at the end of the day, it's about building community with each other. Is if you're in community and you realize that that person is just like you in many different ways and wants a lot of similar things, that therefore they're going to see, you know what, like they're not so different from me. And like there's this polarization. The polarization that happens is like you start saying that this person is not a human, right? You start seeing them as an animal, right? In many different ways, or less than needed. You see that in the Holocaust. You're seeing that in, people at the border, right, who are being, affected and things like that. So like that's something that's happening there. And so it's having a dialogue and trying to talk about what is my connection to a topic. I went to a talk in Oakland, California, for example, on equity and race. And we all had a conversation amongst each other about like, what is my connection to equity and race? And then what is our conversation around that? So it brings into that conversation. And then the last thing I'll talk about is cultivate the Karas. is an organization that the founder of that is Lori Brewer Collins. She is talking about this idea of being a loyal antagonist. So trying to get people together to come around and have a conversation about, you know what, like, I know you understand, you think differently than I do. Let's have a conversation about it and be like civil towards each other. Because she believes that, at the end of the day, like, there's this myth that we are a divided country, and I think the media portrays that, and you see that in social media all the time. But like, what her whole thing is, and I believe too, is that like there is a myth, and there's also this feeling of like there are people against each other, but at the same time we have to start thinking about how alike we all are and trying to tap into those worlds. So hopefully that answered your question there. All right. Anyone else have a question? Do you have any other questions, Sybil? Like, did that answer your question? I hope.
Yeah, I really, I like that. I like exactly how you sort of outline the idea of sort of bringing people together. I think one of the challenges that I see, because I think you're right, I think a lot of us kind of put ourselves like, oh, I'm different from that person's experience, when we have very similar experiences, many of us. But I also wonder, I'm even looking beyond even just like Trump supporter versus non-Trump supporter, because you even found even with Democrats like Bernie's people versus, the larger Democratic organization, and just sort of how the divisions are being sown across everything, not just even Republican versus Democrat. There's, we're having a situation now where people are like, I don't want to, if there's a vaccine, I don't want to take it. So you have the anti-vaxxers against the vaxxers. And like, there's all this stuff a lot of this is being sown, obviously being propelled through social media. But it's interesting because I kind of wonder how much of this is, based off of conversations I've seen with people having online, while they may have a certain standpoint that I don't disagree with, I do sense that there is there's a lot of preconceptions and fear behind the divisions. And I don't know, I'm getting a little esoteric here, but I do wonder, as we're thinking about innovation and we're thinking about how do we rebuild systems, particularly, post this pandemic, what is that going to look like? I really feel that what you're talking about, the empathy piece, it's crucial, because it's very scary to me. Here we are in 2020, and we're in the middle of one of the worst crises that the world has ever seen. And you have people who are basically saying things like boomer remover, and a lot of those are young millennials and Gen Z, and probably who vote Democrat. So these weren't all Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. You're having, like, I work for a union that represents grocery store workers, and you have a number of people. We first were recommending, we had a hashtag campaign called Shop Smart. We're recommending, customers wear masks, social distancing, all that. And then within a 3-week period, we even had our own members saying, I refuse to wear a mask. This is a plot, and people literally killing people because they're being asked to wear a mask before they go into the store. And so, while some of that's just extreme, and you're always going to have like, extreme one-off situations, I do wonder, as a society, as we move forward, I think you're starting to see now, what I am seeing that I think is really wonderful is you're starting to see companies that before were kind of, this is, product we're selling, this is what we're doing. And they're all kind of coming together and saying, hey, don't worry about making your car payments, don't worry about making your rent. you know, don't worry about your bills, you know, we got your back. And I'm seeing that happening, and that empathy kicking in, which is something you probably would never have saw years ago. I think has been really, really wonderful. And I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more of, you know, that attitude being built into our corporate structure. And I just think it's really, I don't know, I'm babbling at this point. Please interrupt, Amy. Share your vision, your wisdom.
Well, you know, I think that's right. There's interesting, like I'm having, I think, I haven't decided how many case studies. I think I have 5 or 6 case studies I'm having in the book where I talk about, these are organizations that I have like talked to, and I think they're like certified by me that I think are bringing empathy into the world. And it's everything from nonprofit organizations to government organizations like the Service Design Studio in New York City that is doing some amazing work around economic and poverty, economic opportunity and poverty. And also there is research that I've done, like organizations like Slack, for example. We use a lot of that in the work that we do. They have built their entire company around empathy. And even companies like Microsoft has been redesigning themselves and going through a renaissance around that. So those are things that I think are really important, that like companies are now starting to apply it. I decided that, and I've written about half of this chapter, but I decided to put a chapter about coronavirus and empathy as out of time. So anyway, I just wanted to say that you know, the coronavirus and empathy is a chapter I'm writing about because I'm seeing so much empathy coming out, and in times of crisis, people are more pro-social, meaning that they care more about other people. You see this over and over and over again. I saw that when I was working in after Hurricane Katrina. People are helping each other out because they have to have that community model. So yeah, that's very. It makes me feel good that our future is going to be bright. I'm an eternal optimist, I think, at the end of the day, when it comes to this stuff. So anyway, it is at 12:30 right now. I can stay on for another 5 minutes or so. I just wanted to acknowledge that you know, the time, if you guys need to leave, I totally understand. I'll stay on for about 5 more minutes and chat. But I'll pivot and I'll talk a little bit about the process of writing this book and this journey I've been on for the past 8 months or so. Does anybody have one last question that they wanted to ask? Okay. Chandra, you're like, no. As you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Okay. All right. So let me just tell you about the process. If you guys ever want to write a book, I'll tell you all the details about it some other time. We'll have drinks or something like that, or a coffee. So I actually signed up for this program. It's actually an experimental program that's through Georgetown University. So essentially it's like a college course where they teach you how to write a book. And it's there's this amazing, and they're opening it up right now again. They do it every 6 months or so. It's this professor called Eric Custer, who really is so dynamic and so great. And he had this idea that he realized that he was teaching undergraduate students to do entrepreneurship. And then he was like, I'm literally teaching these kids to fail at the end of the day. And so he was just like, he had this moment of conscience, and he decided, you know what if I taught them, these undergraduate students, how to write a book, because they will show that they have experience and they have thought leadership, and they can also learn entrepreneurship by selling the book. So that's kind of like the beginnings of this process. And it's been so wonderful because it's community-based. It is every week you have they teach you the nuts and bolts of writing a book, because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. And it's like my first time. So it's pretty wonderful. And what's also great about this program is that they help you through the process, but you own the rights to your book. So it's perfect. So it's not like I get to get in advance. Like, it's not like I'm going to get like 10 grand or anything like that ahead of time. It is something that you own the rights and you can republish your book whenever you need to. So there's two major sections of the book writing process. The first one I would say is like just getting the stories and framing the first manuscript. And that includes interviews. So I did probably about 100 different interviews with different people. I did workshops with different groups of people. And then you start forming stories around that. So for every person you talk to, you write out like a story template that you work on. Then you form them into chapters, create the overall structure of the book, and then you have your first draft manuscript. And that was about a 3-month process where I took all these stories and started being like, okay, what is the thing I'm trying to say in my book? You actually are led with the introduction to your book. You actually, when you write the introduction, it's introducing the entire book, and you're like in a nutshell what you're trying to say. So that was a really helpful experience of me being like, what am I really trying to say with this book? And it helped bring it together. So I delivered my first draft manuscript at the end of October. On the same day, I decided to fly to Oaxaca, Mexico to go celebrate. And then I actually, because I found out about the Aspen Tech Policy Fellowship, I postponed the revisions of my book for about 4 or 5 months, and picked it back up when I came back to the East Coast. And so that's where the second phase came in. This is the revisions phase. So at the mid-March was when I got my edits back from my acquiring editor. Then I've been working on draft 2 of the book, where I'm just like dusting it off after 5 months and being like, like actually my book is pretty good, like that I wrote 5 months ago, and then just refining it. Where it stands right now, I'm at 100,000 words, which is 300 so pages, which is like, I'm not going to be the end. I'm not going to force you guys to read a 300-page book, but I have so much to say about this topic and about this work. And so I'm working with an editor. As you saw, I also launched a campaign, which is still open for the next 3 weeks or so. And, I started a campaign to get you all excited about the work that I'm doing and start building my community. And over the next several months, I'm going to build that community more. I launched the beta reader community. So this is my first, interaction with you guys like this. And then I just talked on Monday with the publisher about my book cover, which is exciting. And have 3 different designs that I've put out there, and I'm co-creating with them. And a designer is going to be designing that for me. And then at the beginning of June is when it goes to copy editing. And then I don't see it for a few weeks. And then apparently I get it back. I have a week to do all my edits, and I have to read my entire book aloud, which is kind of crazy. Because they said, it will, if you read it aloud, it will help you to like make it flow better. So you can come over my apartment and I can do a free reading for you all when that happens. And then I'm just gonna be building my audience between when I deliver it in June to end of July when we publish. And I'm doing it probably about like 20 or 25 other people. So yeah, so that's the process from soup to nuts, essentially. There's some layout in there and some like proofreading and stuff, but the whole process is supposed to take about like 6 or 8 months. So yeah, do you guys have any questions about the book writing process? Any other questions?
Just as I understand that you had to interview people, right, just to get the frames of the chapters and to start your stories. But in general, like what happens when you hit those brick walls, those creative brick walls? Like, what do I say next? What should I be saying? I know you had your introduction that kind of that laid out the path, but for me, it's like design, right? Like I know what I want to write, but I keep hitting this, or I want to draw or something, but I just keep hitting this brick wall. What gets you past that?
Wow. I think when I hit a brick wall, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to put this down for some time, because I've got like 100, I have like 15 chapters or something like that, where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to put this chapter down right now. and then go work on something else because it's not working. But what's really fascinating is that like, I mean, I think I have a knack for writing. That's not the fascinating part. The fascinating part is that, and this works almost every single time, is that if you just start writing, it's just like, just do it. Like if you just start writing and you write for like, 15 minutes or so, you get into it really quickly, right? It's very surprising how you do it. And you're just like, oh, it just keeps going. Like you just keep writing and writing and writing. And so, right now I have like 6 different chapters, like, or things that I'm like revising right now. And I just was like when I'm like, okay, this evolution of design, I need to put it down for a minute. But let me go over here and do something where my kind of heart goes, right? Where it's like coronavirus chapter. So I think it's different for everybody. Also, Salima is also on this message in this session today, and Salima is and I are doing our author support group, which we have accountability buddies as part of it, which has been really cool. I have one accountability buddy we talk about every week where we're like, so it helps us to be like, okay, did I do what I said I was going to do? And like, I don't know if you guys listen to Brene Brown's podcast, but she talks about the FFTs, and they're called the fucking first times. She calls it, and she's like, when she was talking about her first podcast, she was like, I'm in my FFT right now. I'm in my fucking first time. I'm doing it for the first time. And like, that's the thing, that kind of mantra has become my mantra, of like, okay, this is the first time I'm doing it. So be gentle with myself and not try to push too much, is what I've been thinking about, and as I've been building it. So yep. Yay. Thank you, Chandra. Okay, well, I went over a little bit with time, but this has been, I'm so excited you guys actually came. I was like, is somebody going to show up like and talk to me about this stuff? But I appreciate you guys showing up. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if you guys want to just chat one-on-one. I'm happy to do that too. So thank you for joining. You're the best.